Did you know that wealthy ancient Romans used to buy premium slaves whose entire job it was to stand at their shoulder and whisper other people's names into their ear? The more highly trained that slave's memory was, the higher the price. There was even a word for this kind of slave, nomenclator, or name caller. Now, why did the most powerful men in the ancient world outsource their memory? Laziness? Perhaps fear of embarrassment if they ever made a mistake? Oh my. Or maybe they just incorrectly assumed that learning to memorize names would be too much work. Well, it ain't. And Cicero didn't make that mistake. He knew just how easy memorization can be, and he not only memorized names, he memorized addresses and the names of the family members and friends belonging to other powerful people. And in this way, he created a vast social network in his mind. Now, there are several ways to remember names, but one thing has never changed between now and the ancient world that we can read about that Cicero lived in, and the ancient world that Cicero himself wrote about. And that is that successful people take the step to learn how to remember names. And it's more important now than ever before to be that person who can look people in the eyes and recall details without having to break the flow and look things up. And, it's an interesting world that we live in because slavery has a different tone in modern times. And I'm pretty sure we've all heard stories about online technology business owners who openly state they don't use their own technology themselves and wouldn't even expose their children to the online tools that are eroding memory abilities. And think about this for a second, because a lot of us have become slaves to the tools that those people wouldn't use. And think about the fact that all those names that Cicero knew during his time, all those facts, his name is one of the few names that has survived into our time. So there's something about the value of memory that we underplay, but the people in charge of the technology that is eroding our memory, I think they're well aware of it. Now, Cicero could have bought the memory-trained slaves. He certainly had the money for it, but he chose to train his memory. And as a result, he could stand in the Roman Forum and speak for hours without notes. He could name names, quote quotes, name the law in detail, recall exact details of case after case, and he would often crack jokes while his opponents fumbled, making jokes about their fumbling. And because of how he fine-tuned his memory to function at such a high level, his reputation for memory was so enormous that a textbook called Rhetorica ad Herennium was attributed to Cicero for centuries. Now, if you haven't heard of it or read it, Rhetorica ad Herennium is a handbook on public speaking, and it's from around 90 BCE, and it contains one of the oldest surviving step-by-step instructions we have for using memory techniques, particularly the memory palace technique, or as it was called in that book, the method of loci. And what you do with it is you basically walk through a building in your mind and you place associations in specific spots. And we now know that Cicero didn't write this very important textbook, but keep this in mind. Cicero was so good with memory, he became one of the key people that the whole discipline of using memory techniques is based on, and it's still attributed to him, even though he didn't write that book. The most interesting thing, though, for me, is that what he did write about memory is sadly less famous, but way more valuable than anything in Rhetorica ad Herennium, way more valuable than any memory training guide about how to use memory palaces. So in this relatively recent translation of some of Cicero's letters, he writes as a very old statesman, defending against people who say that getting old is a process of slow decline. And he makes 3 claims about memory that we can all benefit from. One is that a trained memory keeps you useful to younger people as you age. But in making this point, Cicero offers a very stark warning. He says that memory only fades in people who stop exercising it. So if you want to be the one in the meeting who not only remembers what a client said way back in March, but also the implications that those statements hold for next year's projections, well, then you're going to be the one who is not only the person who practices your memory regularly, but you'll be the one who gets to teach a junior colleague in your company. And then that colleague, when they age, is maybe going to be your boss, and they'll be the one who decides to keep you on the team instead of firing you, because your value is persistently clear and obvious. You, the one who can perform without checking your notes or begging for a few moments to do some clunky research through the constantly changing, overpriced software that your company insists on purchasing licenses for year after year after year. Now, to be clear, notice that governments around the world are changing the age of retirement. So pay attention to this point and get started training your memory, not today, but right freaking now, because memory is not nostalgia, it's leverage. And it was very, very important in the ancient world, and it's going to be more and more important as the future goes on. So you want to be that person who doesn't have to have that little special thing in your pocket. This is summarizing everything, so that then you have to spend a minute looking at the software and all that stuff. Skip that crap. Make sure that your memory is solid and strong. Cicero also points out, secondly, that you can start learning hard things late in life. It's never too late. He actually talks about how he took up learning Greek in his old age, not brushing up on it, not just, filling in the gaps, starting with Greek, a brand new language with a brand new alphabet. And at an age when everybody around him was telling him to wind down. And, they were telling him to wind down in a way that leads to a pretty savage ending. But nonetheless, it was an ending he made good thanks to his memory. And thanks to his knowledge of memory techniques, Cicero did really, really well with Greek, and he learned it to a high level. So if you'd like to be able to sharpen your memory for safeguarding your future success and successfully taking on hard learning projects like language learning, even if you're at a more advanced age, if you're new here, hit that thumbs up for the love of memory and get subscribed, because video after video on this channel and during my live boot camps, this community helps you get started wherever you're at right now with your memory and helps you persist until that you move beyond perfection, because you've replaced the fantasy of perfect with ongoing progress, and you show up day after day to train your memory. And that's really, really important, because it's really Cicero's third point. Discipline beats pleasure, because the fruits of discipline are the highest form of pleasure. Another way of looking at this is that taking pleasure from your ability to be disciplined gives you your highest competitive advantage. More specifically, Cicero says that the greatest gift of getting older is being released from the tyranny of appetite, so you can be the person who keeps showing up to hard, boring sometimes, deliberate practice. And this will help you speed past the other people who keep chasing the apparent ease of doom scrolling apps and other distractions. But if you're a young person now, get started now with training your memory and your mind so that you can train your discipline as you do. And let's call a spade a spade. Memory training, once you're set up with the proper processes, is wildly effective in just 15 minutes a day, but you're doing something that is slightly uncomfortable. And you're doing it while other people are scrolling their lives away, and you might feel like you're missing out. You are almost certainly missing out on nothing. But what you have to gain is pure gold, because of the reasons that we've already talked about, being that person who is more and more valuable to your fellow citizen. But you know what? Cicero's most important lesson involves memory maybe in an abstract way, and that's part of what makes it so powerful. Everything I just talked about in terms of Cicero's memory training and crushing legal battles at the forum by having time to even make jokes about other people, his role as a statesman, that is, a biography centered on discipline, in part. It's also a story about discipline meeting investment and risk. Because standing in the forum with no notes is taking a risk. Going out in public without a slave to whisper the names of egotistical people in your ear so that you get it right every single time without making mistakes? In Cicero's world, blanking out could mean a lot more than just losing your career or your reputation or your wealth. Without exaggeration, by making one false move, you could lose your life. And I'm not being dramatic. If you read the historical record, there are instances where people literally said the wrong thing, and Cicero sometimes saved their skin in his defense of them. Other times, Cicero was the one who pointed out their memory slips and held it against them to their demise. Perhaps less dramatically, Cicero took on other risks, borrowing heavily, for example, to buy a house he arguably couldn't afford, because he understood that where you live determines who takes you seriously, and also because, he just wanted it. And I'm sure that house made a mighty fine memory palace too. Then there were political risks that were sometimes beyond intense, leading to periods of panic, self-pity, and succumbing to his ego in ways that only made some of his problems in life worse. But it all comes back to memory in the end, because Cicero was able to give value to others and to us in our time precisely because he actually stepped into the fire and he gained real experience to remember and then to use his memory to reason from. So when new problems arose, he didn't have to guess from theory. He could recall with great detail and accuracy what both his teachers and his own experience had taught him. And the costs of never having those lessons embedded in your memory in the first place, they're huge, especially if you are feeling like you're living a life of regret, you have no adventure, and you want to have more of the spice of life and the ability to recall life's lessons on a dime. Remember, if you skip taking risks, then there is nothing to remember. At best, you wind up with opinions instead of judgment that matters. You end up with blather instead of bold inner peace, come what may. Anyhow, I was thinking about the lessons I've learned from Cicero because yesterday I ran 2 live sessions for my students in the magnetic memory method world. I just finished memorizing a long, complicated verbatim text, and I thought, well, I will get some practice in and recite it live. Now, this is 480 words, no notes, no safety net, the book wasn't anywhere near me, and no second take because it was live. And the early morning session went well at 5 a.m. in my time, way down under, no coffee, nothing. I was just there, and I made one mistake by inadvertently dropping a line. But overall, the performance wasn't nearly as choppy as I thought it would be, my first time doing it in front of a group of people. But just before the second session started, something happened that completely rattled my cage. I was completely drained, I was distracted, and I ended up making more than one mistake. And the reason I'm sharing this and why it matters is because I took the risk anyway. And it actually means being more authentic in this world, teaching more about how the memory techniques actually work, and then helping people solve their problems. Because the number one problem I see with memory students year after year is the very thing standing between them and the results that they want. People want to know in advance how things are going to work before they even start studying the techniques in earnest. So this isn't a problem just with using memory techniques. It's a problem with anything you want to achieve in life. So many people hesitate to dive all in on learning new skills because they're essentially asking for guarantees that simply don't exist, guarantees that they won't make mistakes, guarantees that they'll never be embarrassed or never look stupid. Well, I'm building a bookshop right now designed to reflect various aspects of the memory palace technique that Cicero used, and taking lots of inspiration from the ancient world and how we have had these techniques in our ancestry going back thousands of years. And let me tell you, mistakes have been made, far bigger mistakes than blowing a few lines in a memory demonstration. But in both cases, the value of what I've learned is pure gold. Now, there are more bad things that can happen, but the Stoics had this principle called premeditatio malorum, which is to premeditate on all the bad things that can happen. So in a way, there's nothing bad that could ever happen that I haven't already imagined. And at the end of the day, for me, the worst thing that tends to ever happen is really keyboard warriors spitting out bizarre comments on my videos. People with, pure hearts, I'm sure, but for some reason they are preferring to babble out opinions instead of any kind of wisdom. And it just happens, right? That the world is this way. Anyway, this reminds me of something that Cicero wrote in Conversations at Tusculum about the gladiators he'd seen at the Colosseum. So gladiators are people who actually are in the battle, not keyboard warriors. And he wrote, "Has even a mediocre fighter ever let out a groan or changed the expression on his face? Who of them has disgraced himself? I don't just mean on his feet, but when falling to the ground. And once fallen, who has drawn in his neck when ordered to submit to the sword?" When Cicero's enemies finally caught up with him, legend has it that he spent his final hours reading a book. It was Medea by Euripides. Instead of groaning or grimacing or drawing in his neck, he gave his executioner a quick lesson on how to properly chop off his head. No doubt Cicero quoted best practices he'd learned from memory when he instructed executioners to chop off other people's heads. And then Cicero stretched out his neck to provide the clearest and most open path for the executioner's sword. Cicero not only walked his talk, but during what must have been a very extreme moment of stress, he remembered his talk. He remembered his own advice to others, and he took it. Now, I'm not romanticizing the brutalities of the ancient world or asking you to be brave about horrible situations like that. Heck, probably not one amongst us is ever going to bother with politics, let alone wind up in danger of decapitation, metaphorically or otherwise. We're quite lucky that way in our modern times. But I am challenging everyone sitting on the fence about learning any skill to stop humming and hawing about it. Whether it's memory training or starting up a business, risk is the entry fee to success. It always was. And it's probably always going to be. And Cicero's case shows us that risk is actually absurdly cheap. I mean, you can save a lot of money on slaves by learning memory techniques, and you can save yourself a lot of embarrassment by not having to be a slave of a device by learning memory techniques. But you're going to have to pay the price of going to the real place to do the real thing. Genchi Genbutsu, as they say in Japanese. Go to the real place, do the real thing. Otherwise, you're going to be the slaves of those who do. And when it comes to helping people use the same techniques from the ancient world that Cicero used to help you become that person of accomplishment rather than a slave, there's a link where you can sign up for advance notification before one of my next boot camps goes live, down in the description on the screen. And to get started now with training your memory, there's a powerful memory exercise from a very little known source that will set the stage for your own tremendous memory skills. And if you'd like to learn it, watch my video called How Medieval Children Learned to Remember Just About Everything Next. These techniques are not difficult, but they do require a little bit of discipline and a little bit of risk. So, what are you waiting for? Every day you aren't training your memory, you're leaving so many of life's many treasures behind. Make sure to get notified for my next live boot camp. Learn the medieval memory technique next that children were able to pick up. And until we have a chance to speak again, thank you as always for joining me, and keep yourself magnetic.